We are going to be discussing aging infrastructure today, and we've got a great speaker. But before we get into that, I'd like to announce that our sponsors for today's luncheon are Cynthia Burns for CIT Bank. Cynthia's right here with us. And then RMWBH, the firm that I work for. So we will discuss the sponsors and what the sponsors do at the end when the sponsors present the gift cards, which you must be present to win at the end of the luncheon in order for you to get one of those gift cards. So stay tuned, stick around, and then hopefully you'll get a gift card. So your board, which many are not here today, but you've got me, and then Cassie Thompson, our president-elect, I don't believe is here. We've got Art Downey, our VP, Clay Haddock, our secretary, Amy Atkins, our treasurer, and then our at-large board members, Russell Birdie, Doug Smith, and Harman Hammam. You've got your chapter executive director here, Jesus, right at the top. Jesus, give a wave. And I would like to know if we have any new members who are here today. If so, please give a quick wave so we can all of the president have. I'd like to see committee members here to give a report on the goings-on of the various committees. I'm not sure we have very many here, but let's just check and see. Do we have Janae here from Awards and Recognition Gala? Nope. Jesus, is there anything you can tell us about the gala?
Yes, the gala will be at the venue's been selected. The SB in downtown San Antonio, January 29th, I believe is the actual date. Nominations are in the works, and sponsorship programs and opportunities will be available real soon.
Great, thank you. The golf tournament, Jesse or Janae? If Janae's not here, I don't think Jesse is here. Anything you can tell us about the golf tournament, Jesus?
Yes, golf tournament October 8th at Canyon Springs Golf Club. We have a few sponsorship opportunities available. Any hole sponsors out there, please send me an email. I believe we have about 40 players registered, so we'd love to get that number up. If you're a manager out there, you don't have to play, or anybody who's not a golf player, just come out, hang out, drive a golf cart around, visit the sponsors at their holes, stick around for some food afterwards. It's going to be a really fun event, so we encourage you to spend the day with us. That's October 8th.
Great. All right, Commentera. Art, are you here? I don't think Art is here. We're just on another meeting. Maybe he ran to grab lunch. Tom Newton, are you here on education?
Yes, nothing really to report, except we will be having another board leadership development workshop coming up, which will be our last one for the year. So please encourage anybody who might benefit from that training to join that workshop.
And Tom, our speaker for October is Tim Connor, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Membership. Amaris, are you here? Hey, Susan, anything you can tell?
I don't have an update from her.
Jesus looks to be frozen.
Yeah, sorry.
Membership is good, right?
Let me just stop.
That's okay. I know from members that we have almost 400 members in the chapter, which is great. We're up from last year and previous years, so we're pushing that 400 mark, which is fantastic for our chapter. See, sponsorship. Suzanne, is Suzanne here?
She's on another call. Am I still frozen?
No, you're back.
She's on another call right now, but the sponsorship program is in the works. We actually have a focus group on in a couple of weeks with some key folks to get their input and make some changes and restructure for 2022. So we're hoping those will go out no later than the first or second week of November, hopefully sooner. So be on the lookout for that.
Okay, Thank you. And then the legislative update, as we know, the legislative session has ended, but as far as an update goes, for those of you that might not know, CAI has terminated its contract with TCAA, and we're currently examining some other options. And so those conversations are happening, and when we have more information to share, we will do that. So moving into our luncheon presentation entitled Aging Infrastructure, How Do We Plan for the Hidden Issues? We have Andrew Stoutenburg here to speak to us today. Andrew obtained his Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Central Florida in 2010. In 2015, he received his Reserve Specialist designation from CAI, as well as his professional engineer status in the state of Florida. Andrew is also a licensed professional engineer in the state of Texas and Arizona. Since joining Reserve Advisors in 2013, Andrew has worked with community association managers and board members across 15 states and DC to prepare more than 450 comprehensive reserve studies, which serve as a key part of the association's long-term planning process. Andrew handles every aspect of the reserve study process, from conducting the inspection to creating the report, as well as handling all post-study client services. In 2017, he was promoted to Regional Executive Director and became a shareholder. Andrew is a frequent speaker and presenter at trade shows, seminars, and workshops, providing industry-leading expertise to managers and their boards. He regularly conducts continuing education courses for management companies throughout Texas. So we are in good hands with Andrew today. And with that, Andrew, go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Great intro. It feels like I wrote that myself, maybe. I'm not sure. I appreciate everyone taking time. I know it's lunch hour. We all like to be eating, but I'm glad some people are here today to listen to me talk for a while. And as Leah said in the chat box, I really prefer having dialogue as opposed to lecturing, but don't worry, I have plenty of slides so I can sit here and talk and fill up all the time that's needed. But again, any questions come to mind, I really do like to see what folks are thinking and do my best to answer those. And I'll probably have to punt on some of them because I never have an answer to everything, but I'll do my best. So with that, as Leah said, what we're talking about here is what we're calling aging infrastructure. And it's sort of a broad term. And I'm obviously going to do my best to define this a bit, but I wanted to sort of set the stage of what we're going to talk about today. And this is coming from a relatively recent report that was developed by the Foundation for Community Association Research. Now, this is a sort of an arm or branch of CAI, or Community Associations Institute. It's related to the national chapter. And as their name implies, all they do is research for this industry that we're in. They produce a lot of good content, good information. And this is one that they actually started working on, don't quote me here, I think it was back in 2018. It was a number of years in the making. And what I want to do today, spend a little bit of time just touching on the highlights of this report. I have links at the end of this. You'll get this so you can go on their website and read it in total. It's only like 5 or 6 pages, so very easy to read. But we'll start today. I want to talk about some of the highlights, some of the findings in this. And then sort of segue over to, okay, so as a board member or as a manager, or even as a service provider in this industry, maybe this relates to you tangentially. You know, what do we do? What are our next steps? And so what I have here is what I think is sort of the summary question that they were pursuing. And I normally don't like to read the slides, but since I didn't develop this report, I think it's best if I actually read this out loud because I think this is really important. So they're acknowledging that as buildings and their internal systems and physical components age, so as things get old, how can community associations be best prepared to meet the unexpected but necessary financial demands? So what we're saying here is, as buildings and systems and structures age, how do we prepare for that? And what we've found is a lot of communities, probably the vast majority, are not prepared for that. And it's a really hard thing to prepare for. There's reasons, some reasons are maybe valid, some are not, but there's reasons that we're getting to this point in time with older communities. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. And I also want to say, you know, a lot of this, obviously, when you think infrastructure, you do think buildings, and I'm probably going to say buildings a lot. So certainly anyone on the call that's in a condo, mid-rise, high-rise, this feels really applicable. But this is also applicable in an HOA setting, depending on what infrastructure you do as an association. Now, it may not be a life safety issue, right? If subsurface piping is maintained and hold by an association, if it fails, it's not really going to cause loss of life. So it may not feel as critical, but at the end of the day, if it's an association's responsibility to maintain and it fails, it could be a very costly challenge. So I do think this still applies to everybody on the call. So the report did a bunch of surveying and polling, and they got some data back. And I don't think either of these were really surprising, but over 70% of the respondents said maintaining value was the most important concern. So their number one priority is maintaining the value of their community. I guess maybe actually sort of surprising and unfortunate is this bigger number of 80% of the respondents said that in the past 3 years, they encountered unanticipated and unplanned for infrastructure problems. So that is a huge percentage. So, I would say that's most respondents are saying, yeah, we're running into this problem. And again, that was in just the past 3 years. That question wasn't, have you ever? It was in the past 3 years have you ran into this? And this is nationwide polling that they do. It's not limited to our state, but it is through the country, but still it's quite an interesting result. And so again, through this report, through all these conversations and research they did, they said, well, what are the challenges that communities face? And to me, what's on the screen here is not surprising at all. I think anyone on this call that's in this profession is not surprised at all. And I think for you board members, as long as this isn't your first day as being a board member, you probably can shake your head and say, yeah, this all makes sense. I'm not surprised that it's hard to convince homeowners that we need to fund and do these repairs. I know no one here is surprised that it's hard to find people just to be a board member. And then finally, that there's a lot of apathy. Now, my background, the company I work for, all we do are reserve studies. So I think I have a lot of responsibility, certainly in this first one, and we'll talk about it a little bit, convincing homeowners that, hey, this is what you need to do. Unfortunately, I have no expertise in how you figure out getting people to be on your boards. I think it's really challenging. I'm thankful for the board members on this call because I know it's a thankless job. And that is a real struggle that the industry is facing. So, I guess the one thing you can say here is don't feel like it's only your association or you, or it's something your board is doing wrong. This is a nationwide challenge, getting people to step up and volunteer to run these communities. And then I do feel the apathy is something that it may be a result of these other two challenges. So again, if we can start to fix, how do we get people invested personally with their time, but also how do we get them to understand that they need to contribute, then the apathy maybe goes away. Is clearly written in this report, but this are some of the things that we've seen that I think is in this bucket of, well, what are the challenges that our communities are facing? And so going back to the prior slide where, we acknowledge through data telling us that convincing homeowners to spend the money is one of the biggest challenges. Well, what does that result in? That results in deferred maintenance. And I'll dive into a lot of these a bit more in the second part of this, but what we have found is deferred maintenance does a number of things, but two that I want to just mention here is usually cost us more in the long run. And I think that's something it's something that the more we talk about that and draw attention to it, the slightly easier it is to get homeowners on board with, hey, we need to spend the money. It may hurt, but we need to spend the money now to do this project right. Because in the long run, almost without a doubt, it's going to be cheaper just to do it right at the right time. And when you're not doing that, and you're going to end up costing your association more in the long run, this one's pretty obvious. You're suppressing property value. If you come to any type of community that looks distressed, we know when you're shopping for that home or that condo, curb appeal is really something. And it's not just, putting lipstick on the pig, but the more deferred maintenance, the challenge you're going to have in the preserving the value of your community, which if we remember, that's what 70% of respondents said. That's their number one focus. And then again, the other challenge is sort of related to all this is underfunded reserves. And the points I like to make here is, of course, conceptually, I think everyone would agree, yeah, having underfunded reserves is a problem. But there's these sort of hidden problems within that problem that I like to point out is the further behind and off track you become, the more and more challenging it's going to be to get on track. One, because you can have some challenging restrictions in your CC&Rs. You may need some really difficult votes to actually start to get back on track. And then just the simple fact of, as more time goes on and you're diverging, it's just a bigger gap to fill in. We'll talk about right at the end really quickly about sort of some of the funding options and pros and cons of them. But the more underfunded we are, the harder and harder it becomes to get back on track. And so with all of that, talking about this slide, this doesn't actually increase people putting their hand up saying, I want to be a volunteer. But I think it's always important to go back to is, what is that board's responsibility? So let's just say you've somehow got your board, all your seats filled. It's really important to remember these duties that a board must really live up to and work towards. And it's the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty to act. And there's other folks that are going to do a really good job of teaching and coaching on these. So I'm not trying to get too far out my expertise and really elaborate on this, but I think a board member makes needs to be upholding these sort of values. And in my opinion, I'll say the biggest misstep, and it's the one we hear quite often or possibly the most, is a board wants to keep our association dues low, or we don't want to raise the dues, or we want to lower them. Now, you maybe could actually live in that scenario where you are able to lower your dues. Sure, if you can actually do that while making all the other correct decisions, and that's fine. But unfortunately, that's very often the pride of a board is, I haven't raised dues in a decade, or something like that. So keeping these duties front of mind is really important. And the CAI has some board member trainings. I think Tom mentioned, you guys actually have one upcoming, and this is a snippet taken right there. And I think it sums it up well, is it matches what the respondents say. Hey, it's to protect and increase property value. But how is that accomplished? It's by operating the association, maintaining the common property, and enforcing governing docs. So maintaining the common property, really, really, really important. So the report near the end of it, it had some sort of key takeaways. There's a few more. Again, I'm not giving you everything for sake of time, but I really like these. And to me, I think they all make a lot of sense of communities. They did a lot of case study research with conducting this report. The communities that are successful have done these things well. They've gotten buy-in, they've communicated, and the middle one sort of, I wouldn't say just surprised me, it makes sense, but it's not something that I would have said on my own without the data from this report to back it up. But contractor selection was really, so homeowner buy-in and communication, to me, those are very related. I've always talked about those being keys to success. Those are the keys to success for me when I've issued a reserve study. It has a very drastic special assessment. I've physically gone to those annual meetings and had to stand up there and help the board, help the management team sort of explain this to the residents. Now, look, people aren't happy with special assessments, but if you communicate and if you're able to get some level of buy-in, you're going to make it a little bit easier. So I think those are really, really important things. Again, the report's going to elaborate a bit more on those. And not to cast aside, but contractor selection. I mean, of course, I think any of us can relate to this in any, I had a deck installed on my house. Picking the right contractor, maybe it was a good value, maybe it wasn't the cheapest, but I got the product I wanted. So certainly contractor selection makes sense. But again, these are key takeaways. These are some of the keys to success for managing these challenging situations, which all relate to aging infrastructure, right? Our community getting old, and what does that mean? And then finally, it sort of summarized it here that if you're postponing actually doing the repairs and replacements, what's the result of that? It's just really you're up creek without a paddle. I mean, that's my words, not the words they put in here, but that's really what happens. It's going to be really challenging. So again, at the end of this, you'll get an email with a link that includes that full report. I think it's a really great document. Maybe you can even look at some of the other studies that association has done. that being said, okay, so what do I do with that? Like, that's great. They'd spent time researching and telling us this is a big problem, maybe bigger than some of us thought. So what do we do? And I think the way I view this is there's two main things I want to drive home today. And so it's two steps, I would call it. We need to think about identifying things, and then we need to think about investigating them. And so we'll elaborate obviously on both these and sort of talk about what goes into this. So when I say we need to identify our problems, we need to identify our responsibility in terms of, capital repair and replacement. Well, how do we go about doing that, right? Board member, manager, how do I go about doing that? Keys to success here too, and we'll dive really into all of these, but first, timing. Early is essential. How is a reserve study going to facilitate that? But also, how is it not? And that's the thing. I said at the beginning, the company I work for, all we do is produce reserve studies. I obviously think it's a really valuable tool, but I think what's extremely important is understand what it can and can't do. So maybe what's extremely important is we're going to identify what it can't do, because a lot of the things it can't do relate to this concept of infrastructure. So we'll look at that, and that gets us into that investigative phase. What do we now need to do to really get to that next level? So maybe this first phase, you're not going to learn much new. You already know all this. But when we think about how do we investigate further, I maybe lean in and listen on that. So as we're identifying, I said early is key. Time is a community's friend, meaning the earlier you can do something, the better everything is going to be, right? So we can think of that financially. If we have 20 years to plan for the roof replacement on our condo or at our pool house, that's great. I got 20 years to save up for it. If I've got 2, it's going to be a lot more challenging, really, really basic, right? I think we all get that. But even on the physical side of things, early is really helpful. Let's think of a concrete structure, a mid-rise, reinforced concrete frame building. The sooner we start to identify potential issues, the sooner we can investigate those and go further. And there's a trap here in that early on, let's just stick with concrete structure. Early on, you may see some really minor things here and there. So it's cracks. Every building has a little spall here or there, some reinforcing steel. Well, if you decide to look at that at only 5 years of age or 10 years of age, and then you find out the extent of that problem and you rectify it, you're going to be better off than if we waited 2, 3, 4 decades and then look into it. So it goes back to that concept earlier we mentioned, if deferring it is likely going to lead to bigger costs. So the point I'm trying to make here is not getting tricked and thinking it's not that big of an issue, we can deal with it later. No, deal with those issues while they're still small, keeping them from becoming bigger. And this is where the reserve study starts this process. Because obviously a reserve study, we can come in, we're going to look at all of the common elements that are there and give you that roadmap forward. But the next slide, or in a few minutes, I really want to harp on what it can't do, because that's really important. But the reserve study, I think many folks on this call are familiar with it. My goal here today is not to dive into all the nuts and bolts of it, but understand it's that long-range capital expenditure plan for all of the common elements, things the property has to maintain over the next 30 years. But with the reserve study being that sort of first step in that identify stage, I put the last point on here. I say, don't skip to the fix, find out the cause. I'm sort of trying to say, many times we need to look a little further. You likely need to get to that investigatory, I don't know if that's a word, investigative phase, to make sure you're actually making the right fix. And so pictures are helpful, right? So I like to have pictures. When I actually developed this part of the presentation probably a month or so ago, because I used it in another one. And when I was putting it together, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted a photo like this. I'm going to explain it. But I've seen this dozens of times, but I didn't know exactly what community, it would be hard. So I actually texted our engineer manager, and I knew he was out in the field that day inspecting, but I said, hey, I'm looking for a picture, blah, blah, blah. I'll explain it in a minute. And I kid you not, he from his phone texts me because the property he's at, once again, has done this exact same thing here. So what the heck are we looking at, Andrew? Why is it so intriguing? So this is in a mid or high rise structure. This is in a garage. And many of these structures have those elevated pool decks, right? You know, the 6th floor, you walk out from the building, beautiful pool deck, landscape pavers, it's amazing. And then below that is the elevated garage. Without getting too technical, that's a very complex, in essence, roof system, right? You have all those amenities. You have to have some waterproofing below it. And then you have this concrete garage, structural concrete garage. So what happens? Everything deteriorates and breaks down. And what is the culprit of so many problems is water. You know, water is finding its way through this waterproof membrane. It drips into your garage and it leaks all over your cars. And so what are we doing here? We're not actually solving the problem. We are saying, I don't want the water dripping on our cars. So here we go. It's not dripping on my car anymore. This is a prime example of what I'm talking about. We got to make sure we investigate things fully. And now you may be thinking, well, Andrew, maybe they're just doing a good job of managing this until they investigate it further. You could be right. But then I'm going to show you this picture where they spent a lot of money. This is the most robust water catching mechanism. I actually didn't inspect this property, but that I've ever seen in a garage, right? So they've actually now spent a pretty decent amount of money to again, do what? Not to fix the issue, right? They're just saying we're putting a Band-Aid on it. We're worrying about sort of the effects, but not the cause. Now, to what extent do we investigate? Of course, it depends on what we're talking about. So if you look at a reserve study and it says, let's replace our pool furniture next year, I don't think you need to investigate that. But again, when we talk into more critical systems, so building envelope things, facades, roofs, plaza decks, in an HOA, it could even be your paving. If you have private streets, you got $1 million of asphalt. Maybe before you just go lay down new asphalt, you take some time, bring in some experts to really evaluate and get you the right plan in place. If you have some areas of significant deterioration or settlement, maybe we need to understand why. So you don't just repave over that and have the same problem happen again. But as I started this, I really wanted to get to infrastructure. So what is infrastructure? Probably should have actually looked up the official definition, and I could have sounded really smart to tell you exactly what infrastructure is. If anyone wants to do it, you can do that and then tell me and maybe correct me. But I'm going to give a very incorrect, superficial statement. That's, again, no, don't quote this. I know we're being recorded. We'll just edit this part out. But to me, I like to think of infrastructure as stuff you can't see, right? Let's just go with that. Stuff you can't see. You know, the things that are in a building that are keeping it running, the plumbing, the piping, the electrical system, the structural core, the actual structural elements of this system. In the HOA, the subsurface piping. Some of these things you see bits and pieces of it, but it's the critical components that keep either a building or an association functioning. I'm actually really intrigued now after this to look up what infrastructure, the true definition is. So what I have here on screen is sort of some categories that relate to this concept of infrastructure. And what you're actually going to find is a lot of reserve studies, certainly the ones we produce, they are going to have some costs related to maintaining these infrastructure items. But that challenge is when a reserve study is being conducted, you're never really going to have the full picture from any reserve study, right? So this is that key. And this is where, if we go all the way back to the beginning, when we looked at those survey results, where 80% of respondents said they had an unplanned and unexpected expense related to infrastructure in the past 3 years. This is where this begins to get really murky and confusing, because I just said, open up your reserve study. If your building's old enough, you're going to see a line item probably for internal building plumbing. But how accurate were we with the timing and cost of that project for a common element that we had no ability to actually observe, right? A reserve study is visual, non-invasive. So I don't have x-ray vision. There's no way I'm actually seeing your pipes, but I'm including something for them if your building's old enough. And so that's one of the causes of this unexpected or these unexpected expenses occurring, because either it's just nowhere in the reserve study. So then of course you're surprised by spending money on plumbing, or again, any of these, I'm just saying plumbing over and over again as an example, or you did have something in the reserve study, but there was a disconnect of understanding that this is really just that first approach at getting some cost allocated for the plumbing or for the structural facade, or the electrical system. But it's absolutely going to need to be investigated further. And so we're going to talk about, well, what does that investigating look like? What is needed? And so here's, the point I was making out: visual, non-invasive, right? The one other thing to think about, this applies to infrastructure, but it applies really across the board on your common elements, is not forgetting, the way I say it is, specific problems typically need specialists, right? So again, that reserve study, anyone producing a reserve study is a generalist, not a specialist, right? We're like your general practitioner. You go to him or her for your basic ailments, but then you got to go to those specialists, like to actually deal with whatever your specific issue may be. Exact same thing applies to running and maintaining your building or your property or your community. So think of that reserve expenditure schedule as that initial roadmap, that initial guidance. It's directionally sending you where you want to go. But let's go back to that plumbing. It's not going to give you the exact answer, right? Or let's think about a facade element, structure or balconies, structural concrete balconies. Absolutely, you're going to have cost set aside for those in a reserve study. But the reserve specialist did not go balcony by balcony, doing concrete soundings, maybe some penetrating radar evaluation of the steel, and then develop the cost. No, absolutely not. The reserve study said, how many of these balconies do you have? What are their typical sizes? What is a likely expense needed? But until that is investigated further, the exact scope and cost and timing is not going to be completely known. So that then gets us to this concept of, okay, well, thank you, Andrew, for telling me that your reserve study is not going to answer my questions. What do I do now? And hopefully you don't actually think that fully. So we now need to think about, how do we investigate further? And so I mentioned this, but it's worth repeating here. If we identify early and investigate fully, that's going to get us the best result. That's going to cause us to maybe spend a lot of money now, but like we talked about with deferred maintenance, it's almost certainly going to save us money in that long run. The photos earlier, I think, drive of the water catching systems, I think drive home the point of, if we don't fully investigate it, if we don't really find out the problem at hand, you're potentially throwing money away, right? And so I've absolutely worked with associations that they did the right thing and they have a reserve study starting point. Great. They then from that realize, okay, we need to look into this further. Either it was balcony, structural concrete issues, it was plaza deck, waterproof membrane systems, or a host of others. But then they fell into this trap of not really fully investigating it, doing it not as diligently as needed. And I think it's to me, one main challenges are, you are going to spend money doing this. And, spending money today to save money tomorrow is not an easy decision to make. And as a board member, so if you yourself are a board member, or for the managers on the call, I think encouraging those board members to understand they are doing the right thing, even though they're probably going to get a lot of pushback, because why spend money looking into this further? We know there's water leaking. Let's just fix it. That's an uphill battle at times. But again, the money spent today is going to save money in the long run. And so, we want to think through sort of in the 5 whys, or root cause analysis. And it's obviously not as simple as literally just asking why over and over again, but it is that philosophy that comes from the process improvement world of really getting down to the core reason something is occurring. And the point I'm trying to make here is that getting to that root cause, it's going to take not only money, but it's going to take time. And so that's what makes it challenging, right? Time and money, those are a very precious commodity, but it's something that we need to do. I mean, so here are photos. These are from our inspections, things that we saw, now, so a couple things I want to point out here. This deterioration didn't happen overnight. This is significant. I mean, that reinforcing steel you're seeing, some of that, this is not my inspection, so I'm guessing here, but some of that is probably inch diameter, number 8 rebar or bigger. I mean, that's big stuff. This is structural beams and slabs in a garage, elevated structural concrete. So first, this didn't happen overnight. Second, this is not the only property where we've seen this. We see this far more often than we would like to. So they've already, unfortunately, not investigated, not fixed it, not done anything. It is what it is. This is the point in time we're at. So now, what is this community needing to do? Well, they're going to get a reserve study. They got one, and we put right in the front, executive summary, told them you need to get this evaluated. So then what did they do? They brought in a structural firm, structural engineers. They came into the property, they assessed it to a much better, fully assessed basis than any reserve specialist could do, myself included. They were able to give this association very clear guidance of what they need to do now and what could even wait up to 5 years. So from our opinion, we said, hey, red flag, you've got issues, but they need to go further. They need to spend the money they did on that structural firm. And then they even find out that some of it can still wait. But only by looking at it further were they able to then make those informed decisions. At that point, with that expert giving them that insight, they were making informed decisions on what they did need to spend money right now today on. But I think maybe even more importantly, they had an informed decision on what could wait. And knowing what can be deferred, because obviously you don't always do everything at once. There are constraints in place, but knowing what can be deferred is a very, very helpful thing, right? So surrounding, as a board or manager, surrounding yourself with those right experts, very, very critical. This is a property, this is something I inspected. This was a high rise in Houston. And I mean, I don't even think the pictures do it justice, but these garage stairwells were rusted through. I mean, the one on the right, you can sort of see it, but I walked down these, I didn't go back up these. I was like, not going back on that. We tell them, hey, rope these off, get these inspected. I can't tell you definitively, is it okay to continue using, but bring in the right expert. It's a much smaller component. You're not going to spend weeks evaluating this. You're just going to get the right individual to tell you, do we need to replace these now? Can we repair them? Are they fine? What do we need to do next, right? The whole point here is we got to investigate things. We got to look further, and it's harder the more hidden this item is. It's more difficult the more of a true infrastructure type item it is. And so what I have here is not definitive. This is simply to give some talking points to somewhat give a framework of what do I mean when I say investigate, what could this entail? And so if we look left to right, it's sort of moving from that generalist to that specialist. It's moving from the high level, broad evaluation to the precision, very focused. Reserve study, I think it's the starting point. It's going to outline all your expenditures. It's going to highlight the near-term concerns. It's going to highlight the question marks. But from that, what could be next? So again, hypothetical here, but maybe this is a property where the structural concrete facade, the balcony and the vertical surfaces, those need a condition survey just on those components. This may be your plumbing stacks need to be scoped. We need to fully understand how bad is the sediment accumulation in your cast iron sewer pipes, or maybe your subsurface piping through your HOA neighborhood. Looking at these systems on a much more narrow focus is that next level, and it's going to start to cost more. But by doing that, maybe we get even further, and there's a detailed, I'm saying detailed investigation. That's not a formal name or anything, but this could be where, all right, well, we did the evaluation on those balconies, but it was still non-destructive, right? It was still, we just, surveyed, we went balcony by balcony, did concrete soundings, we found some problem areas. Maybe now we need to go even further. Maybe we need to do some destructive testing. We need to do some other testing procedures like the plaza deck I mentioned. You can actually do surveys that actually can tell where water has infiltrated below it. You'd never be able to see that until you rip it off. But what are we talking about here? We're talking about more time spent just evaluating, investigating it, and more money. But only by doing that are we enabling you as a board member or manager for your boards, only then are you able to start to have the full understanding of the problem and what it's going to take to fix it. And then finally on the right, so we've figured out the problem. We know what it is. We know we need to fix it. Something that, depending on project size, that I think should absolutely always be part of a project is true, spec writing, contract writing, and even project oversight, quality assurance. If we, again, go all the way back to earlier, one of the report takeaways talk about contractor selection. as a board, as a manager, you're going to do your best to get the right contractor in there. But even the best contractor, we are all human. I've never found a contractor that did a project 100% perfect. Not that they did it on purpose, but it's human nature. There's on these big projects, there's thousands or tens of thousands of man hours going into it. So without any third-party oversight, you're just trusting that contractor. And so I think that's something, again, depending on project size, how you manage those projects is going to be really important. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. Yes, this is going to add cost. This is going to make us spend more. But if this is that Plaza deck, let's go with that project. And we're finally doing this and we're spending $1 million on it. And we're hoping this new system should last 25, little more than hope on that. If I'm spending $1 million, I'd want to spend 1.1 million. I'd want to spend 10% more to know that we built this 100% right, or 99% right, as best as we could. So spending the money now to do the best to ensure we get that lifespan that's necessary from the system, I think is going to be really, really important. Now, that's all good and well if your community is young now and you stay on top of it. You have your expenditure schedule from a reserve study as your starting point. And as issues start to barely manifest themselves, you begin to investigate and you solve these things as they begin to occur. That's the best case scenario. That time is on your side throughout the future where you're being as proactive as possible on everything. Reality is many communities are already 30, 40, 50 plus years of age. Many communities at any point in age are woefully underfunded. And that's where there's the whole next level of challenge of maybe you have even identified and investigated and now know you need to spend $1 million, but your reserve balance is 100,000. So what do we do at this point? Well, ideally, we're not in that last minute, last ditch effort, and you have time to accumulate reserve funds appropriately. Very critical. This is, getting folks to understand we need to put the money aside today for our use of these common elements. But if we're able to achieve that, that's the best path forward, right? It's equitable, it's the most stable, it's the least volatile. But we get in these situations, out of time, out of money, you're really going to be faced with, in essence, two options. So you can special assess, or you really have to go to third-party lending. And of course, there's going to be pros and cons to those. I always say, banks aren't going to give you money for free, but they obviously are a huge resource in this community association industry, because at the end of the day, if you need to do the project, you need the money. It's a great mechanism to raise it. Again, we want to try our best to be funding for these. We actually have some associations that have reached out to us that we've worked with in the past, and they actually are having trouble securing funding because they're in such a predicament that it's a bank has to protect themselves. So it's not that it's always, well, at the end of the day, we just go get a bunch of money. I don't want to say it's that simple. I know there's some great bankers on this call, and they've talked about this over the years, and they obviously are there to serve this industry very well. But it's not the silver bullet. It's still a challenge. And the goal is to avoid this. So we identify early, we investigate fully, and that puts your community in the best position possible to avoid these surprises that can come from this aging infrastructure. And so I guess right there, I already said it, it's about avoiding surprises. And that's the most common thing. The most common thing is that we're going to get surprised, and no one likes that. But that's really what we run into. Lawsuits, frivolous lawsuits, actual structural damage, those types of things. Well, I shouldn't say lawsuits aren't common. Of course, the lawsuits, exist, but that's a less frequent challenge. The real challenge is the surprise to you as a board member, surprise to all your neighbors as homeowners, surprise the community as a whole, right? That we didn't even know we maintained the subsurface piping. We didn't even know, well, yeah, we were built in the 50s, so this is really old. We didn't know that it did have a lifespan and would actually need replacement. We didn't know it would cost $1 million. And then they don't know how they're going to come up with those $1 million. So that proper planning as soon as possible, right, is really about avoiding these potential risks. And that's it. That's all I have to talk with you guys about. As I said here, you'll get a PDF of this, and these links are in it. The first one is that actual report from the Foundation for Community Association Research. The second one I put in here is also from them. They actually have a number of best practices reports that cover a whole host of topics in community association. They're really good documents. Those are quite lengthy documents, but I put the reserve study one in here. CAI has also recently put together this condo safety page. That's really as an outcome of the unfortunate collapse of the structure down in Surfside, Florida. CAI over the years has a lot of resources, of articles, of items that can be helpful for anyone on this call that's in the condo world. It's a great resource. So I linked those. There's obviously other resources at all those websites that I think you'll find helpful. And with that, I'd love to, if there are any questions or any comments, I'd love to field those and answer those and just see if there's anything I can help with.
Thank you, Andrew. That was great. I'll ask one question that I know that we'll probably get. Are you going to make this PowerPoint available?
Yeah, so we will share it. I'll actually already share with Jesus, so that will come out. You'll get it. And then you can always call me if you have questions on it.
Wonderful, thank you. Any questions for Andrew? And I imagine if anyone has any questions after we get off today, people can just email you directly at your email address there.
Absolutely.
Great. All right. Great.
I have a question. Have you ever seen anybody add landscape items to a reserve study, like irrigation and like we have significant common spaces, so we've got a lot of trees that are very important to our community. Have you seen that before?
Yeah, really good question. So irrigation systems, absolutely. We always include those, as long as the community is of a decent age, because that's in my very non-defined definition of infrastructure. That's definitely a big ticket item. And I mean, some HOAs, that's hundreds of thousands more. So absolutely for the irrigation systems. The living element side of that, so actually, the sod, the plants, the shrubs, the trees, we are seeing more and more requests for that to be included, because as you indicated, in some HOAs, that's a huge dollar amount if you are going to go through and replace large sections at once. It is not something that you're going to see by default. As far as I know, none of the providers are coming in, and we certainly aren't. We're not coming in and saying, hey, we're looking at all of your living elements and here's a value to replace those at once. It's always more of reactive of when I'm meeting with a board. If it is a concern, we can certainly include it, but we're going to much defer of what is your approach, because that becomes, even though it's a big dollar liability, the way you approach that is very discretionary. Because aside from like handling unsafe conditions, you can let your trees mature for a very long time, and just when one falls over, you safely get rid of it. And so it gets much more into discretionary, but it is still the association's problem. Or responsibility, I shouldn't say problem. So irrigation, absolutely. Landscape is more discretionary, but is very applicable. If a board wants it to be included, it absolutely can.
Great question. Any others? All right. Well, on behalf of the chapter, Andrew, thank you so much for all of the really useful information.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. All right, so let's give away a couple of gift cards, y'all. First, Cynthia, would you like to tell us about CIT Bank?
Sure. After this presentation, I think I'm scared to ever buy a condo, so thanks, Andrew. No, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the informative presentation. My name is Cynthia Burns, and I work with the Community Association Banking Group of CIT. We are a full-service banking partner for management companies and over 36,000 communities across the United States. And we have helped a lot of those communities get funding for projects that Andrew mentioned today. I've been a part of the group for 15 years. I've enjoyed working with many of you on this call to some capacity. Just thank you for being here, and thank you for investing your time and education with CAI. My contact information I did put in the chat, so if you do need something, feel free to reach out.
Thank you. All right, Jesus, you want to call a name?
Let's give away some money. I'm going to keep my camera off because my internet is unstable here in Houston. Okay, first one Rose Carter, PMI Birdie. Rose, are you still on the call? She was on. I see her there. You mind unmuting or just right there? You are. You have no audio. Perfect. Rose, congratulations.
Oh, no audio. Okay. All right. Well, congrats, Rose. All right. And as for your second sponsor, it is my firm, RMWBH. For those of you that don't know, RMWBH stands for Roberts, Markell, Weinberg, Butler, Haley. We are a full service law firm that does a lot of HOA work as well as real estate, corporate, and litigation. We've been around for over 40 years. We have offices in Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin. And we are big on collections, corporate governance, covenant enforcement, and compliance with federal and state laws. So we are available to you. I think everyone knows how to get in touch with me or any of the other attorneys at our firm. If you have any needs, please do just reach out. And with that, Jesus, let's draw a name.
Next would be Rich Zelensky.
Oh, Rich! And he turned his video on. He must have known. Congrats, Rich.
Thank you. Thank you. I thought it might improve my chances, and it did.
Well, you did the right thing there. All right. Well, everyone, it's so nice to see everyone's faces, and be looking for your emails to hear some details on our meeting for next month. We will have a live speaker. We'll be in person. We are still figuring out the venue, but fingers crossed everything is going well in the world, and we'll be able to get out there and be in person and get to hang out. So with that, I will close for today and wish you all a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Bye.
Bye.